The air at the cemetery still clung to me as I drove back through the winding streets of Asheville. The quiet service had left me hollow, just a handful of neighbors, a few veterans from Dad's old unit, and Aunt Ruth standing close enough for me to feel her steady presence. When the final shovel of earth fell, it was as if a door had closed forever. I carried that silence with me, heavier than any weight I'd known. The house loomed at the end of the road, its white siding weathered but familiar. Every inch of it had been my anchor since childhood, a place where Dad's voice filled the rooms with discipline and kindness in equal measure. I expected emptiness when I turned the key, a cold echo of what once was. Instead, the sound of a television hummed through the walls. I stepped inside, my breath catching. The hallway smelled faintly of takeout, not the polish and cedar Dad always kept. In the living room, Marcus sat sprawled in Dad's old recliner, his duffel bags piled near the fireplace like he'd been there for days. He didn't look up right away, just smirked when he finally did, as if he'd been waiting. "This house is mine now," he said flatly, his tone rehearsed. "Dad promised it to me. I've already sold your things, so you should probably pack whatever's left and go." The words struck harder than the graveside silence. I couldn't breathe, couldn't even summon anger, only the sharp sting of betrayal layered over grief. The furniture, my books, Mom's quilts, Dad's medals. How could he? I gripped the door frame, my voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. "You had no right." Marcus leaned forward, eyes glinting with something between triumph and desperation. "Rights don't matter. Corinne, possession does." The house seemed to tilt under me, the walls pressing closer, every memory of my father colliding with this intrusion. I stood frozen, unable to look away from my brother, already knowing this was only the beginning of the fight he was determined to start. And as I faced him, I felt the past stir, dragging me back to the shadows of our childhood. I couldn't stop staring at Marcus, sitting there like he owned the air I breathed. But behind his smug face, another image rose up, the two of us as children in this same living room, the carpet rough under our knees, the sound of Dad's boots on the porch warning us to behave. Dad had a way of filling the house with his presence, firm but steady. He believed in work, in earning your keep. Every Saturday morning he'd march us into the yard with a rake or a bucket, telling us, "A house stays alive when its people care for it." I took those words to heart. Marcus didn't. He'd slip away, pretending to help, only to be caught sneaking off to his friends. Dad would shake his head, but somehow Marcus always got away with less. When Mom died, I was barely 12. The silence after her funeral nearly broke me, but I forced myself to step into the space she left behind. I cooked what little I knew, made sure Dad's uniforms were pressed, tried to keep the laundry folded. Marcus, 3 years older, disappeared more often basketball courts, late-night drives with friends. Responsibility never sat on his shoulders. It sat on mine. The house became my refuge, even when it felt like a burden. I learned the creak of every floorboard, the way the walls held warmth in winter, the smell of cedar from Dad's workbench drifting into my room. It was where I grew into myself, quietly, with sacrifice stitched into my bones. Marcus never let me forget it. He'd sneer, Dad's little shadow, as if caring was something to be ashamed of. He wanted freedom, while I carried duty. Now, watching him sprawl in the chair our father polished every Sunday, I wondered whose legacy this house really carried, his hollow demands, or the years I spent giving everything I had. And in that moment, I knew Marcus wasn't finished twisting the past to claim the future. I forced myself to step farther into the room, even as every instinct told me to turn and leave. "What right do you have?" Marcus, I asked, my voice low but sharp. "This is our family home. You don't get to just move in and decide it's yours." He leaned back in Dad's recliner like a king on a throne, crossing his arms. "Dad told me," he said with deliberate calm. He said the eldest son takes responsibility. It's tradition. This house was always meant for me. The words cut, not because they were true, but because I knew exactly what he was doing, spinning a story, turning half-truths into claims. Dad believed in responsibility. Yes, but he never confused it with entitlement. Marcus went on, smirking. "I've already called a couple of buyers about the furniture. Some of it's antique, worth more than you'd think. No point letting it sit here collecting dust." My stomach dropped. The thought of strangers pawing through the oak table Dad built by hand, or the quilts Mom sewed in the months before she got sick, made me feel sick. "You sold our things," I whispered. "Our things." He shot back. "No. Corinne. They're mine now. You should be grateful I'm letting you take a few boxes." His arrogance was like a fog pressing in on me. I wanted to scream. But instead, my mind reached back to Dad's words during one of our last evenings together. He'd been tired that night, resting in his chair, eyes already clouded with illness. One day, he had said, "You'll need to look after yourself. Check the papers when the time comes. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." At the time, I hadn't understood what he meant. Now, staring at Marcus, I felt the pieces shifting into place. My brother was trying to rewrite history, but maybe Dad had left behind the truth. And if he had, I would have to find it before Marcus destroyed everything that mattered. Marcus's smirk hardened into something uglier, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You were Dad's pet, Corinne. But don't fool yourself. He never respected you. He pitied you. You clung to him because you had nothing else." The words burned, but I held my ground. I was here. Marcus. I stayed when Mom died. I stayed when Dad's health started slipping. "Where were you?" He leaned forward, eyes flashing. "I was living my life, not playing housemaid. You think folding laundry and hanging on his every word makes you noble? It just made you pathetic." His venom stung because it rewrote the years I had poured into keeping this family intact. But beneath his rage, I saw something else flickering fear. Later that evening, Aunt Ruth pulled me aside in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she set down her teacup. "He's been coming to me for months," she whispered, "asking for money, promises of paying it back, but it never came. I told him no." She sighed, lowering her voice. "Neighbors talk, Corinne, cards, gambling, one bad deal after another. He's in over his head." I closed my eyes, the pieces snapping together. His obsession with the house, the sudden urgency, the arrogance masking desperation, it all made sense now. He didn't want the house because it was Dad's legacy. He needed it, like a drowning man grasping at anything within reach. When I returned to the living room, Marcus was pacing, muttering about buyers and quick cash. He looked less like a man claiming his inheritance and more like someone clutching at survival. I felt something shift inside me then. This wasn't about honor or tradition. It was about my brother's ruin, and the house was his last lifeline. And I knew that if Dad had left me the truth, it was the only thing standing between Marcus's desperation and the life I had fought so hard to preserve. That night, I couldn't sleep. Marcus's words replayed in my mind like a bitter refrain, but louder still was the echo of my father's voice. I remembered him in his chair, hands weathered, voice soft but firm. "Check the cedar chest when the time is right." At the time, I thought he meant old photos or family keepsakes, but now I understood. He'd been pointing me toward something more. I rose before dawn, padding down the hallway to his study. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar polish, a scent that felt like him. Papers were still stacked neatly on the desk, unpaid bills mixed with veterans' newsletters. I searched drawers, rifled through folders, but nothing explained what he meant. My frustration grew until my eyes landed on the cedar chest against the wall, the one that had sat there since childhood. I lifted the lid. Old blankets, yellowed letters, and a box of medals lay inside. I sifted through them carefully, but still nothing. Desperation gnawed at me. Maybe I had misunderstood him after all. I pressed my hand against the bottom, and something shifted. The panel was loose. With trembling fingers, I pried it up, revealing a narrow compartment. Tucked inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's steady script. My breath caught as I tore it open. The first paper I unfolded was the deed to the house. Notarized and clear ownership transferred to Corinne Callahan. My name, in black ink, standing against every lie Marcus had thrown at me. Behind it was a letter, written in Dad's careful handwriting. Corinne, this home is yours because you cared for me when no one else would. Let it protect you now, the way you protected me. Do not let guilt or fear take what is rightfully yours. Stand steady. Love, Dad. The tears came hot and unrelenting, smudging the ink at the edges. For years, I had wondered if Dad truly saw the sacrifices I made, or if they faded into the background of duty. Now I knew he had seen it all. I pressed the papers to my chest, the weight of his trust settling into me. And with dawn rising outside the window, I knew the time had come to face Marcus with the truth. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds when I finally gathered the courage to face Marcus. My hands shook as I carried the envelope into the living room where he sat sprawled across the couch. Shoes kicked off, the remote in his hand as if he already owned everything within these walls. Without a word, I placed the deed on the coffee table between us. His eyes flicked down, then up at me, unreadable for a heartbeat before his mouth twisted into a bitter laugh. This, he lifted the papers like they were scraps of junk mail. You expect me to believe this? Please, Corinne, this is forged. You probably had some notary friend of yours whip this up after Dad died. The accusation hit hard, but I forced myself not to flinch. Dad signed this months ago. It's real. Marcus, the house is mine. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. Then I'll see you in court. You think a judge won't take my side, eldest son, rightful heir. Family tradition, I'll bury you in legal fees until you hand me the keys. Before I could respond, Aunt Ruth appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. She stepped into the room and laid a firm hand on the back of the chair. Marcus Callahan, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. You need to stop this charade. Everyone in town knows the mess you've made of your life. The debts, the gambling, the begging. You've burned every bridge you had. And now you want to drag your sister down with you. Marcus's face reddened. Stay out of this, Ruth. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when you disgrace the family name. She shot back. I felt my pulse steady, the fear in my chest shifting into something firmer. I looked Marcus in the eye. Dad chose me because he trusted me. You chose yourself every time. That's the difference. For a moment, he seemed ready to strike, his jaw clenched, hands curling into fists. Then, with a furious growl, he shoved the papers back onto the table and stormed toward the door. The slam echoed through the house, leaving behind silence heavy with warning. His footsteps might have faded, but the storm he carried wasn't gone. It was only waiting for its chance to return. It didn't take long for Marcus to strike back. A week after our confrontation, a courier arrived at my door with an envelope stamped from a law office in town. Inside were copies of 2 so-called letters my father had supposedly written, both naming Marcus as the rightful heir to the house. The handwriting was clumsy, the dates inconsistent, and the language so unlike Dad's plain-spoken style that my stomach turned just reading them. I brought the documents to the attorney who had notarized the deed. He barely skimmed them before shaking his head. "Fraudulent," he said firmly. "No court would accept this. If your brother pushes it further, he'll be the one facing charges." Relief washed through me, but it was short-lived. The more Marcus flailed, the more dangerous his desperation became. Soon after, whispers trickled through town. Neighbors mentioned seeing men in dark cars parked outside Marcus's rented apartment. Others muttered about loan sharks and unpaid debts piling higher than he could climb. The grocery clerk told me Marcus had tried to put groceries on a closed account. At the diner, I overheard a conversation about him bragging of big deals that never materialized. His mask of control was slipping in front of everyone. Walking through town, I felt eyes glance at me with pity. Not for me exactly, but for what Marcus had become. I remembered him as a boy, running down these same sidewalks with laughter spilling behind him, a ball under his arm. Now people only spoke of his gambling, the money he owed, the promises he never kept. Watching from the distance of my own porch, I understood this wasn't just cruelty anymore. Marcus was collapsing, dragged under by the weight of choices he had made again and again. And though I carried the proof of Dad's trust in my hands, I carried something heavier in my heart, the knowledge that my brother's fall was inevitable, and it had nothing to do with me. The question was how far he would sink before he finally broke. After weeks of watching Marcus unravel, I needed quiet. The house had been heavy with his shadow, every corner haunted by our clash. But that evening I forced myself to walk through its rooms again. Sunlight filtered through the windows, catching dust motes in the air, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, I felt something gentler than grief. I lingered in the kitchen, running my hand across the oak table Dad had built. Memories rose unbidden him, sanding the wood late into the night, telling me, a home is made in the details. Corinne. Each room seemed to breathe with his lessons, but it was the workshop at the back of the house that pulled me in. The air smelled faintly of sawdust, though the tools were neatly arranged just as he'd left them. In the corner, I noticed a small wooden box, its lid carved with simple lines. I hadn't seen it before. Kneeling, I opened it with careful hands. Inside lay one of his service medals, still gleaming, and a folded note in his handwriting. Corinne's strength isn't in force, but in holding steady when others lose themselves. Build your peace here. My chest tightened as I read the words again and again, tears slipping down my face. For months, I had been bracing against Marcus, against whispers and threats, trying to prove myself strong. But Dad had known the truth all along. Strength wasn't about fighting louder. It was about refusing to be moved when storms raged around me. I pressed the metal into my palm, feeling the cool metal warm against my skin. The house was more than walls and deeds. It was a living message, built from his faith in me. I closed the box, steadied my breath, and rose. Somewhere outside, the world waited for Marcus's next strike, but inside these walls, I finally felt ready to face it. It didn't take long for Marcus's facade to crumble completely. One by one, the people he owed began knocking on his door, first polite, then insistent, and finally threatening. He stopped answering his phone, stopped showing his face in town, but the whispers followed him everywhere. The same neighbors who once tolerated his arrogance now crossed the street to avoid him. Even the bank moved swiftly, seizing what little he had left. When he finally came to me, it was not with the swagger I'd grown used to, but with a hollow look in his eyes. He stood on my porch, unshaven and trembling, his voice swinging between fury and desperation. "You have to help me, Corinne. Just a few thousand. I'll pay it back. You owe me that much." I said nothing. The silence stretched until his voice broke. He cursed me then, spitting venom about how I'd stolen everything from him, then collapsed into tears, begging like a child. Still, I held my silence. Aunt Ruth sat with me afterward, her hand covering mine. "You can't save someone determined to drown," she said softly. Her words lodged in me like a truth I'd known all along but never wanted to face. Within a week, Marcus was gone. No one knew where, maybe another town, maybe nowhere at all. All he left behind were unpaid debts, broken trust, and the echo of the boy he once had been, lost long before I ever realized it. For the first time in months, the house felt still, as if it too had released a long, weary breath. And as I looked around the rooms that held my father's legacy, I understood it was time to reclaim not just the house, but my life within it. The seasons shifted before I felt steady enough to begin again. Winter's heaviness gave way to the first warmth of spring, and with it, I turned my attention to the house. Slowly, I began filling its rooms not with the silence Marcus left behind, but with pieces of the life I wanted to build. I pulled out the quilts my mother had sewn years ago, their colors faded but their warmth intact, and draped them across the beds. In the workshop, I polished Dad's tools, setting them in place as if he might step in any moment to use them again. One afternoon, I dug a hole in the yard and planted a magnolia tree, its slender branches reaching upward with quiet promise. As I pressed the soil around its roots, I thought of Dad's words about strength, how it wasn't about force but holding steady when others lost themselves. This tree would be my reminder, growing season after season, no matter what storms came. Standing on the porch, I let the view settle into me. My brother wanted walls, I whispered, but my father left me roots. The truth of it felt like a weight lifted. In the weeks that followed, I opened the doors to others. Neighbors stopped by for coffee. Aunt Ruth brought pies, and children played in the yard where Marcus once sneered. The house became what Dad always intended, not a fortress to be hoarded, but a space for life and kindness to thrive. Justice had never been about punishing Marcus. It was about honoring my father by protecting what mattered most. And as laughter drifted through the rooms, I knew this was the true inheritance he had left me,